What's up, freaks? This rip was brought to you by River. River's a Bitcoin company built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners the right way. There's no trusted third parties. They build all their infrastructure. They have free DCA because they know it's the best way to buy Bitcoin. So if you want to buy Bitcoin, you want to mine Bitcoin, you want to send Bitcoin over the Lightning Network, you want to plug into their Lightning Network API. If you're a developer, they're building all these tools for you. They also encourage self-custody. Again, they're Bitcoiners. They want to provide an on-ramp for you and then teach you and encourage you to take control of your own Bitcoin. And they're doing this. It's a beautiful company. If you do hold Bitcoin on the exchange, you can know for sure, since they don't rely on any third parties, they don't lend your Bitcoin out, they don't speculate with your Bitcoin. Your Bitcoin is held in a multi-sig wallet with 100% reserves. Okay? So go to river.com/TFTC, take advantage of the no-fee DCA. You set up your dollar cost average. You don't pay any fees on those buys. If you're a developer, they have their Lightning Network Services API that you can build on. You can send over Lightning. You can mine via River as well. You may have your exchange. You may be comfortable with it, but have you tried River yet? It's a question you have to ask yourself. If the answer is no, go try it. That's where all the Bitcoiners are hanging out. That's where I get my Bitcoin as well. River.com/TFTC. Thank you guys for listening. If you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe, set the notifications up as well. We're going to be putting out a lot of content this year. If you want to subscribe to the podcast feed as well, if you're not around your computer or not listening on YouTube, but you want to catch the podcast on the podcasting feeds, subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. And if you want to learn more about Bitcoin, I write a newsletter almost daily during the week. Go to tftc.io, subscribe on the website, and you'll get pure signal on Bitcoin, macroeconomics, geopolitics, whatever tickles my fancy that day. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for supporting the show. If you can subscribe, rate, review, goes a long way. We're trying to blow this up in 2023. Enjoy the rip.
You've had a dynamic where money's become freer than free.
If you talk about a Fed just gone nuts, all the central banks going nuts.
So it's all acting like safe haven.
I believe that in a world where central bankers are tripping over themselves to devalue their currency, Bitcoin wins. In the world of fiat currencies, Bitcoin is the victor.
I mean, that's part of the bull case for Bitcoin.
If you're not paying attention, you probably should be.
What's up, freaks? Welcome back to TFTC. This is a rip that was put together last minute, literally in the last hour. I'm sitting down with Adam Popescu, who wrote an incredible piece in the MIT Technology Review that dropped last Friday, I believe. Is that correct, Adam?
Yeah, on Friday.
And you're telling the story of Virunga National Park in Congo and how they're leveraging excess capacity at a hydro plant that they've been building to mine Bitcoin to help fund the national park, which has been hit by a wave of misfortunes in the form of Ebola and COVID, which have restricted tourist revenue. And so they've been leaning on Bitcoin mining to fund the park. Before we get into the Bitcoin mining, I think it's important to learn more about Virunga, why you went over there, and what you saw, Adam.
Absolutely. First off, thank you for having me. Good question. Why did I go over there? Why are we even talking about this place? I think that when you think of the word Congo, or when the average American hears Congo, they probably go, you mentioned Ebola, they probably go in their mind to the book, which was called Congo by Michael Crichton, which is about basically killer gorillas. Or before that, there's been a lot about transmissible diseases from this region. There's a lot of misinformation. There's Joseph Conrad from Heart of Darkness over 100 years ago, or about 100 years ago. It's always been a place that has a lot of mystery, a lot of exoticism, and a lot of misinformation. At the same time, it's got a lot of wealth potential. So back in the day, it was rubber and ivory and timber, and also just manpower, because it was part of Belgium in terms of like King Leopold, who was the former king of Belgium in the late 18th century, or sorry, 19th century. Basically, it was a private country, and the guy never even stepped foot there. So this is the past of this region, a very complicated, many different languages, country the size of Western Europe, not many roads, not much electricity, and the last 20 years, a lot of war over over minerals. So cobalt, coltan, a lot of the things that function or allow our technology to function are derived from here, from these rare earth mineral mines.
Yeah, that was.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say the cobalt mining particularly has been in the news recently. I know Joe Rogan interviewed somebody who went down there, really trying to expose the. I can't think of a better word, atrocity of what's going on in those mines.
Well, yeah, there's a new book called Cobalt Red, which is all about this issue about supply chains and where we get the pieces of technology that function or that allow our lives to move at a really brisk clip. But these are the kind of places where, for lack of a better term, life is cheap. People are willing to do really heinous things to get what they want. And there's a lot of gray area in terms of legality and what's acceptable ethically and morally. So all of these things are for a writer, for a reporter, and for a reading audience. It's incredibly rich and visual and interesting. A very rich palette to paint with, if you will. And I have a background where I have gone to sort of end of the world places and told stories that are a little bit counterintuitive or a little bit surprising, I hope, that will get readers' attentions. And that's everything from going to the Himalayas for various places, looking at man-made glaciers and tracking snow leopards, to the Galapagos, where the Chinese fishing armadas are fishing in a national park and exploiting that rich resource. So in Virunga National Park, which is known for a Netflix documentary about these rare mountain gorillas that are being threatened, and a group of rangers who are like a law enforcement body who are risking their lives to protect them. That was what I knew. I didn't know much beyond that. Mm-hmm. And over the course of many months, talking to the park and getting them to vet me and verify me and what have you, I ended up going there in March, late March of last year. I actually arrived in Congo March 23rd, which is very symbolic because, as you alluded to, M23, the March 23 movement is the big militia group in this region. And when I was arriving on March 23rd, it was very auspicious. I'm not really into that kind of, I don't look at numerology or any of that stuff, but at the same time, it felt kind of weird. And by the time I left, there was actually, unfortunately, an attack by them that just coincided with me leaving. So it was very sobering and very real. And my goal there, I heard about the hydro power plants. I ended up doing a story for New Scientist, that magazine. It's a British publication, which mostly focuses on science and conservation issues. We looked at the hydro. I also did a profile on the park's prince, Emmanuel Demerode, for the New York Times. That looked at him as a figure and some of the controversies and successes he's had. But when I was there, they said, hey, we have something to show you that no one really knows about. And that's this, the Bitcoin mine in the jungle. And when I saw this, basically a million different thoughts flooded my mind, but the big one for you and your audience is that this is an incredible story that needs to be told. And when I came home, I started crafting it and pitching it to some of my contacts, and here we are, almost 9-10 months later.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it really highlights is, number one, the importance of energy, because I think the really interesting point that you make in the beginning of your article is that there was a material amount of deforestation, because it's a national park, but there are Congolese who actually live within the park and try to go about their lives. And there was a material amount of deforestation going on because people were cutting down trees to get energy in their houses. And so a solution to that is building a hydro dam that would produce reliable electricity that they could use instead of cutting down the trees. And so that's another topic that's been a recurring theme on this podcast, is the importance of energy, particularly to uplift people in the developing world out of poverty and to give them a sort of base layer of quality of life that they can then begin to build a better life on top of. And what we've come to find throughout history, and more acutely over the last year, I would argue, is that reliable energy is extremely important to uplift downtrodden areas of the world out of poverty and bring them into the modern world. And that's one thing that Bitcoiners have been talking about for quite a bit, and that's why I'm sure I'm not the only Bitcoiner who is happy that you wrote your piece, but it validates something that we've been saying, is that Bitcoin mining particularly can be this buyer of first resort to help incentivize either the build out of these reliable energy projects or sustain them in times when demand is lower than otherwise would be, like it has been in Virunga, due to the fact that they can't have tourists come in.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly complicated and controversial theory or practice of development here. To give a little more backstory of what we're talking about for those who haven't read the article, essentially, there are a series of hydroelectric power plants in this area. Like I said before, there's no power grid, so there's no way that someone can just connect to the country's grid. Roads are pretty much all dirt, so incredibly undeveloped in terms of modern amenities. One of the issues here is that having, how do I put this? I'm searching for the right words here, because basically what I'm trying to say is it's not a zero-sum game. Mm-hmm. It's not that this is all good or this is all bad. We tend here in the U.S., or at least I'll speak for myself, things work or they don't. We tend to look at, you call up 911, the authorities arrive in time or they don't. You turn on your tap, it either works or it doesn't. Your phone bill, et cetera, things like that. We come to rely on these things and we take it for granted. In a lot of the developing world, resources or amenities that we come to think of as second nature are really the purview of the wealthy. And there's a lot of trickle down, and if one household has a hookup to electricity, for instance, maybe 7 or 8 people get it through extension, and that can help a group of people. Not everyone wins, and it can cause a lot of jealousy, a lot of issues, a lot of corruption. So, I say this because I don't think that this is a one-size-fits-all. This is the solution to this region's problems, or this is something we can replicate in other challenging developing regions. I think for the Bitcoin community, it's a great narrative because, as you said, this says, there's a lot of vilification of using energy that pumps fossil fuels, causes issues within local communities, et cetera, corruption. This is something that your folks can say, hey, wait a second, this is clean energy and it's helping. And I think it is. At the same time, what makes this compelling, what makes this controversial is who's benefiting. If there's millions of people here, how many of them really get a piece? How many of them really benefit? And my argument, or maybe my perspective as an outsider when I come there, if a place is kind of neglected by the rest of the world, if it's too dangerous for foreign investment, if it's too dangerous that the UN has the biggest mission that most people don't even know this. They've been there for 20 years. They have $1 billion plus mission, thousands of troops, and they don't do shit. That the locals don't like them. And there's it's complicated, but in a quick 1 second synopsis, they haven't really known what to do, and that's caused a lot of traction and a lot of animosity with local communities. So if only if this park and the resources are saved, if a small percentage of locals benefit, is that a win? Is that a positive? I mean, these are the kind of things that I'm trying to get at in the piece. There are a lot of gray areas that aren't as cut and dry morally as we might have in other places with other endeavors.
What are some of the examples of things that may not be as cut and dry?
Well, you mentioned the deforestation.
Mm-hmm.
There's still deforestation. You can, if you're leaking in a lot of places, you start to plug them up. You might not be leaking as much, but you're still leaking. Yeah. I think a lot of the problems here are political problems that cause, by extension, dominoes to happen. A lot of the people who become radical, and by radical meaning picking up a weapon, it's the same conditions that can be happening in the Middle East. It's the same conditions that can be happening in inner city America. It's the lack of resources, it's trauma, and it's also a feeling of desperation. So when you feel these kind of, the weight of these things, and maybe you're really hungry too, and you don't have a piece of land, you're willing to do anything because you're in a position where you don't have a lot of options. That's the scenario in this region. So by providing more stability, lighting, water pumping stations, the potential for electricity, maybe not everyone gets it, but it's possible. And a lot of it is paid for by this operation, the Bitcoin mine. Well, then you could say, okay, these are beneficial. Again, not everyone will get a piece, but it's moving the needle in a place where the government itself and foreign actors are not.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing.
Complicated, right?
Yeah, it's very complicated, but I do. It's why I really like your story. I want to highlight is because it paints an encouraging picture of, yes, it's still chaotic. You mentioned towards the end of the article, as you were getting out, there was missiles being shot over the park, and the hydroelectric dam was taking artillery fire, and that's unsettling. But through all of that, there is this silver lining and a gleaming glimmer of hope that there does seem to be a workable model that is slowly iterated on and built on over time. It can provide locals with, again, a base layer of comfort and utilities that would disincentivize them from picking up those guns or getting desperate, or prevent them from getting to a place of desperation, or at least lower the probability of it. And yeah, I get the story only gets more fascinating from here, considering the characters that are involved.
Right.
So there was a Belgian prince who took over managing the national forest, I believe a decade ago. Was it 2012 or 2014? I can't recall the date in my mind, but
yeah. Again, here's another, depending on your, we're all experts from afar, and we all make an opinion about something. Some of it is informed and some of it's not. And it's easy to throw dirt at somebody who appears to not belong in a place. This character you're talking about, his name is Emmanuel Demerode. Yes, he is a Belgian prince by blood, or by birth. He's also a guy who's lived in the Congo and slept in a tent for the past 20 some odd years. A guy who survived an assassination attempt and took several bullets in the chest. Survived the surgery, translated the surgery to doctors who didn't speak a common language, sacrificed his family made many personal sacrifices in order to see this through. And when you look at that big picture of this character, what really comes out is I think a belief that he has for change. Some of his detractors would say that it hasn't worked. At the same time, we don't know what would have existed without it, in terms of, could have been some kind of power vacuum, that it could have been worse. It's so hard to say in these places, but you need people who believe. Also, when you're in a leadership position, it's inevitable to have enemies. It's inevitable to be seen as an outsider, which he is. Can you be an outsider? Can you be an extension or symbolic of the past and yet be a good person in this capacity? These are like the heavy stuff that I tried to wrestle with in the article. And I think that, it's easy to have think about these, okay, Belgian prince in a country with a dark colonial past from Belgium. He's got to be a bad guy, He's got to be all the boogeyman type stuff you think about. And then you meet him and you see how this guy lives. You see his morals. You see his values. You see some of the change. I mean, it's like pushing a boulder uphill. It keeps coming down, but he keeps fighting. And it's hard not to have respect for the guy. And it's hard not to want to root for him, which is something you're not supposed to maybe say as a reporter. But I think if you are, it's like pretending to be this, to not have an emotional reaction to a situation or a character. I mean, we all do. You know what I mean? You try to give someone the benefit of the doubt, and you try to do right by them at the end of the day, no matter how you feel about them. But you have to admire his tenacity, whether or not you believe in it. The fact that he's sticking with something under incredible challenges, it's impressive.
Not really. I mean, like you mentioned, he's literally taking bullets for this national park and kept chugging and
That's right.
trying to innovate and improve the quality of life for people living in the area, and obviously protect the gorillas and the rainforest. And it's really interesting.
He would say, here's this. So we would think of it as protecting the gorillas in the rainforest. He would say, well, what we really got to do is protect the people. Mm-hmm. And we really got to give them an incentive. And that's where this is all about, because, again, maybe this project, it doesn't put money in the pocket of every single person. But if it moves the needle to create some level of stability or improves upon it, then that's a net positive. It can't be the only thing, but you know what I mean? Like when you have a neighborhood that's a bad neighborhood and you have that one anchor business and you have something developed next to it, and it's over time it starts to grow. And if you can look at it that kind of simplified analogy, maybe that's helpful to understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, one step at a time, slowly but surely. And I think in the article you mentioned that this hydroelectric dam, via the electricity will provide to the market, could provide something like 12,000 jobs in the area, which is...
Well, it's already provided, those are, and it's a rough estimate, but I went and visited some of these jobs. I mean, basic stuff, but soap factory, vegetable oil, chia seeds, chocolate, a lot of chocolate. I didn't know this. Tons of chocolate comes from this area. They also have the park has a project with Ben Affleck, actually creating a chocolate company to bring it to the U.S. The chocolate's already in stores in the EU, but I mean it's a good business idea. It also provides a stable market for the local chocolate farmers. Like chia seeds, coffee, like lots of these kind of things show that there's a lot of potential for the kind of grassroots community businesses we're talking about. And that those are all, again, when you think maybe like a Yellowstone, if you would hear, Yellowstone is helping ranchers and farmers with soybeans or whatever, or cattle, you might think, well, that sounds odd. But if Yellowstone didn't have roads, if Yellowstone Rangers were being shot at every day by the guys from, the local ranch or whatever, I mean, then you kind of have to frame it, okay, they're being forced into building some of this stuff by circumstance. And again, this becomes so utterly fascinating that's why I think that's why we're talking. You know what I mean? It's like there's Bitcoin mines everywhere. There's national parks all over the place, but there's all these confluence of factors together that just makes it kind of, how is this possible? What does it mean? What's going on here? And what's the long-term sustainability? Can it be replicated elsewhere? That it's just, some of it's a head scratcher too.
Yeah. And so let's dive in there, get more into the specifics of the Bitcoin mine. What did you observe? I mean, you tell the story of there's a rich French Bitcoiner crypto person that has decided to go in on this. They have a number of containers, some of which Virunga owns, and the other which this French Bitcoiner owns and pays electricity to the hydroelectric dam in Virunga National Park. And so they're not only mining themselves, but they're also producing electricity revenues from this French gentleman who's mining alongside them.
So to actually look at the operation, you have to fly in. You can drive on the road. It's incredibly dangerous. It takes a long time. It's dirt roads in the jungle, so when it gets muddy, it's also you better have some backup tires and whatnot. But we flew in. It's a very short, steep runway. Either you're going to be freaked out or it's exciting, and it's kind of, you're flying in the middle of nowhere and you're battling altitude, and then there's this little strip of patch between the trees comes out and you land there. And I felt, for me, like I'm like a kid, I'm wowed by this. I don't need to know what to expect. And the actual hydro plant, it's very clean and actually beautiful, if you could say that about a piece of machinery, but because it's just it's such a stark contrast to the relative underdevelopment in the area where people there's a lot of people who ride around on these bicycles that are made out of wood that look like something from the Flintstones. I'm not trying to be insulting to them, but it's just very basic kind of stuff that don't have tires that they can just go to the local store. They don't have a lot of stuff, so there's a lot of very, I guess, bootstrap type stuff. So to see this piece of modern machinery or the modern world here, and the level of professionalism, again, it's just very wow, because not too far away, you have rebel groups who are not cool with this shit, and
Yeah.
rightly so. I mean, they're it also is a bit of hard to wrap your head around, because you think, okay, well, this is a very professional operation. Here's 10 containers, and they look like shipping containers, and inside, again, very clean. You could step inside and you could be anywhere. There's engineers and people are certified and they know what they're doing. And then you see, when you're looking around, well, there's a lot of guys with guns. There's a lot of guys who look very serious and are providing security for this to run. And it's kind of hard to, there is an excitement and there is a feeling of something special is happening here. And it's also tempered by the notion of, well, how tenuous is this? Mm-hmm. What's stopping the local Mai rebels or the M23 coming and taking this? Is that on their radar? If they took it, and this is something I actually asked Emmanuel, if they took it, could they get the password? Could they then get the wallet? Can they, how at risk is this another commodity in this area with full of commodities from diamond to gold to cobalt? Is this something else that's now dangerous? And, that makes it when you think about it, how do you get an investor to invest in this? How do you get someone to come and spend 3 months as a foreigner? What do they tell their wife or husband? Or what kind of insurance is there? How safe are they? And essentially, you're putting your safety in the hands of someone else. Even me just being there, I have to trust to a degree that these people know what they're doing and they have a secure location that if something happens that they know what they're doing. And so that in and of itself, you think about all these things, and there is a level of risk that is higher than other Bitcoin mining operations in other undeveloped countries, whether it's Central Asia or Central America, which both of them can be extremely dangerous and extremely volatile. But what they don't have here is just so many different groups trying to get a piece. And that's what, makes this ultimately the detractors and the people who say, wait a second, is that how can it, even if this does provide stability for this little, let's say even this area, well, you have 5, 10, 20, some people even say 100 different militia groups. So how do you possibly mitigate all these different risks at the same time?
Yeah.
It sounds like such a I don't even want to call it a headache. Sounds exhausting. Sounds almost untenable.
Excuse me, I have something in my throat. Yeah, no, it's very high risk, and we've seen this actually with Bitcoin mining, particularly in Bitcoin's history. Venezuela, specifically, where it wasn't rebel groups or anything, but it was the Maduro regime identified Bitcoin mining operations and confiscated the ASICs and began mining themselves on behalf of the Maduro government. And so that the risk certainly does exist. But there are, if you can protect the site, and then you mentioned like the Bitcoin, like if they show up, can they get the wallets? And I think that's one of the most beautiful parts of Bitcoin is you can set up in a way where, yes, you can, excuse me, you can be mining physically in Virunga at this hydroelectric dam, but since Bitcoin's digital, you can have your wallet somewhere else, protected, maybe even in Belgium or with somebody you trust in other parts of Congo that's better protected. You could store it there and send it from there. But yeah, no, all these variables add up. It does come with risk. But again, I do think it does highlight a glimmer of hope where, yes, it may be happening in this extremely volatile area, but hopefully it proves to be a model that is replicable. And maybe, again, going back to the disincentivization to actually pick up a gun and steal something from somebody. Maybe this paints a picture for others. Like, oh, maybe I don't need to pick up my gun and go take their resources. Maybe I could spin up a mining operation over here with this hydroelectric capacity and do the same thing, just join them peacefully in this market. Not saying that's going to happen, but it does, again, create that glimmer of hope.
Yeah, I mean, again, if in other places without electricity, for instance, can create hydro projects, and one of them from an extension from those projects would be a crypto mine, they can then create basically passive income once you've already paid it off. If that can then be distributed, then that is totally a model. It could be a model.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, even at this Virunga facility, right, it's not even fully built out yet. They have capacity for more, like how much more energy could they bring on?
I don't know exactly how much more they can bring on. I think, I'm sure the volatility of the currency is a factor. I think there's other things at play here. I think that you might be seeing stuff like this in other places in Africa regionally sometime soon.
Yeah, there's a company Gridless out in Kenya where they're spinning up mini hydro dams.
I heard about that in Kenya too. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a great thing where like electricity from these hydro dams typically would be like 15, 16 cents a kilowatt hour. But since they have so much excess capacity and Bitcoin miners can come in and suck up that excess capacity, it provides enough revenue to these micro dams that they can lower the costs for the locals, the residential consumers of that electricity, which is a beautiful thing. And that's another thing. I mean, we mentioned jobs earlier, but you were interacting with the individuals actually running this mining operation, and they were younger Congolese gentlemen who may not have been aware of Bitcoin or how it worked exactly, but they've been learning and they seem pretty passionate about what they're working on.
I think, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what's your perspective on what their lives are like?
I think that if you get an opportunity to do something that is so different than what your peers get to do, it's a big positive, for one. It's inspiring. It makes it feel like it's possible to have change. Again, it's if only about, I think there's roughly a dozen full-time Congolese staff at this location. Again, it's quite small. There was, I may be fudging this, but I believe several hundred temporary workers, building this facility. And so it's not the masses, but these are the kinds of questions in that gray area that from earlier we discussed, is that for those who get it to benefit, and then maybe by extension family or people who hear about it, these are incredible opportunities to change a life and to really dream big in a way that it's not like selling your startup or getting acquired. It's a chance to really break out of some of these poverty cycles in a real way that is incredibly inspiring.
And so for you personally, I know you mentioned when we talked on the phone earlier that you don't consider yourself a Bitcoin expert, but we didn't dive into like your notions of Bitcoin, if you had any, before making this trip out to Virunga, compared to your perspective on Bitcoin now. Like how do you think about Bitcoin? Did this trip change your mind at all?
Well, I'll tell you this. There's a lot of enthusiasm, and there's a lot of real excitement from Bitcoiners. Obviously, there's been some blows in the narrative in the last year plus. I think that there's a tendency, sometimes people want to, some of the notion about the pollution has been a sore point for Bitcoiners who are very defensive sometimes about it. And I'll say this, a project like this, these kinds of projects could really help that narrative. That in a way that it's not a stretch. It's not, if it's really running on clean power, a hydroelectric power plant that uses a dam, it's called a river run, so it doesn't actually change the flow of the water too much, and it's very minimally invasive. Again, passive, basically becomes passive income once it's paid off. Those are, whether or not you believe in Bitcoin, those are positives, and those are even not even positive. That's not a negative. You know what I mean? That's something that's not harming. If we want to go the climate route, it's not adding to that. So that's that's something that I wanted to highlight, as opposed to my feelings. I mean, and this is not the first time I've written about blockchain stuff. I've written about some of the operations that Tesla is doing in Nevada with one of their big facilities. Sometimes the story of Bitcoin for good, sometimes it's a marketing tool. Sometimes I think there is real potential for good, for positive stuff. I think this in Virunga is one of those examples, but it can be very easy to make it seem like hot air. And I think that's why there's also skepticism of something like this project in Africa, because there's been unfortunately, it's attracted a lot of kind of showboaters and grifters and a lot of folks who maybe lean so far in that they turn off the masses.
Yeah, there's certainly been a lot of scammers out there who have really drawn bad attention to the space. I mean, particularly in the last year, things like FTX, Celsius, BlockFi, Terra Luna, all that crap. But when you get down to the fundamentals, like you mentioned at Virunga, really highlighting that it can bring reliable, abundant energy can help bring reliable, abundant energy to places. And then, on the narrative front too, like actually I'm part owner of a mining company. We go a bit the opposite direction. We use natural gas to mine Bitcoin, but we find stranded natural gas wells with no pipeline connectivity. They're just leaking methane into the atmosphere. So Bitcoin mining in this context acts as an economic incentive to go clean up these stranded wells that are just sitting there rotting away and over time leaking methane into the atmosphere. So you show up, throw a generator on the well, create electricity to mine Bitcoin, use the gas in a very efficient way, prevent that methane leak and prevent that methane from getting to the atmosphere, which is a way. So it's not incentivizing quote unquote renewable or clean energy, but it's cleaning up this energy that already exists and is just sitting out there. So it can help with the development of hydroelectric projects and then help clean up some of the nat gas projects that are already in existence today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's at the end of the day, this is somewhat of a speculation, and we're gambling. This is what it is. I mean, it maybe if people want to make money on this, that's their business, and they're perfectly allowed to, and that's what this is what this is about. Some of the questions of whether or not decentralization makes sense, I don't want to turn off you or your viewers, but I'm not sure. Some of these questions are continuing to be asked. Regulation, the need for not having things be totally identifiable. As you alluded to FTX, there are real questions here. If there is more transparency, maybe that helps. Maybe it's also it doesn't replace the dollar. Maybe it's another currency within the financial space that that it has more of a legitimacy at the table. Questions that remain to be seen and are quite interesting.
Yeah, no, I think. What do you consider? I mean, what many would consider. I don't know. I don't like to label myself, but probably like an anarcho-capitalist. That I think regulation is bad. I think governments only make things worse, and I think Bitcoin's really proving that, and its distributed nature can help. Going back to the transparency point, like think of Congolese individuals who may want to get out of the country and take their little amount of wealth with them without being able to be identified. Like Bitcoin is a perfect tool to enable that, whereas the native currency or the dollar even would make that significantly harder, especially if you're moving physical units of those currencies. I think that's the thing with like centralized control and transparency. Like you can't have this token that's worth accumulating if you don't have the distributed network that provides inherent utility that doesn't exist elsewhere, particularly in the form of being able to send transactions in a pseudonymous peer-to-peer fashion without the prospects of a despotic government or a corporation that may not like what you're doing telling you no, you can't make that transaction.
I don't know what to say. I'm thinking about the crypto. What did you say? Crypto anarchist. And I'm still fumbling on that one.
Anarcho,
Sorry.
Anarcho-capitalist. Yeah.
I tried to warn you before we went on that I'm just a regular guy.
I know.
I still have some paper money in my pocket over here.
I do as well. And I think I'm under the purview that Bitcoin's an imperative moving forward. Obviously, I've erected this media company. I've dedicated my life to it. So that's it's just explaining my perspective to you. But I think,
Absolutely.
no, I think again, even though extremely happy that you took the effort to get over to Virunga and write this story, because again, Bitcoin, the Bitcoin mining is just an interesting variable and overarching, incredible human interest piece, and highlighting some very, very important problems that we need to face as a society, particularly around energy generation, these resources that we're taking out of Congo, leveraging child labor or bordering on slave labor to a certain extent, in highlighting ways in which this area is trying to better itself through electricity generation is extremely important.
Yeah, we're at a very strange time and a very dangerous time in so many ways, and unfortunately, everything is so interconnected, and we're all kind of at the mercy of everyone else, in a sense that everything from our day-to-day lives to the supply chains and the way the economies work and the climate and everything else, I want to be hopeful, but it's sometimes, if it's challenging given the state of things that we're in. And that's the flip side of being a reporter, being a journalist, is seeing so much of that up close.
Yeah, I can imagine what it's like seeing what you've seen on the ground. But again, don't want to belabor the point, but going back to Bitcoin, we have fix the money, fix the world in big neon lights right outside our studio here. And that's what I think a lot of people like to focus on, the political taste of the day, and blame politicians, red, white, red, blue, whatever it may be. Where I think the core and the root of the problem globally is that we have fucked up the money everywhere. And money is the most important tool to coordinate economic activity to allow people to pull themselves out of poverty and make better lives for themselves. And I think what's going on in Virunga is an example for that, being able to monetize this open monetary network, able to utilize it to monetize your wasted energy.
Absolutely. If it's excess energy, it's a great way to use that. And, I believe that I'll probably be going back there at some point. I hope it gets a little safer. I'm not going to go until it does. And I think that this operation there will be growing, and you'll see similar models in the region.
Oh yeah, it's incredible to hear. Before we wrap up here, is there anything, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience? Places to look into? Maybe is there any way they can help out with what's going on in Virunga?
Yeah, it's a good question. I believe the park does accept crypto donations. I believe they accept Bitcoin donations. I think if you're interested and you're interested in this topic and what these people are doing, I encourage people to see the Netflix film Virunga. I encourage them to visit the website and take a look at some of my reporting on this. But just to kind of it's very easy right now in today's world to just look at a tweet or a headline or whatever, and you kind of keep it moving because we have so much stimuli we're all bombarded with. But maybe take a second and read a little bit more on it, because this place, like so many other fascinating regions, is so far beyond that just headline or that tweet or what have you. And it's almost a forgotten place, and full of people who matter just as much as those suffering in Ukraine or wherever else, or your own stuff. And we often don't see or don't care about what doesn't impact us. But again, in this interconnected world, you have a cell phone, if you have technology, good chance that it's coming from a place like this. And it's an eye opener when you see we're all really connected in a lot of the ways that we don't even realize.
Yes, completely agree. The Cobalt. I haven't read the book yet, but watched the interview, and it's pretty jaw dropping. How people don't think of the front end of the supply chains; they just see their iPhone. Life's better.
Yeah, Cobalt Red is a fascinating book. King Leopold's Ghost by Adam Popescu, fascinating book. And then Dancing in the Shadow of Monsters by Jason Stearns, who I interviewed for my piece. I also interviewed Adam Popescu. All fascinating geopolitical nonfiction that set up some of this scenario that I've been writing about, and just are ultimately fascinating.
Yes. Go check it out, freaks. Adam, again, we put this together last minute. I appreciate you being nimble here and hopping on in short notice. Again, I think it's a very important story to highlight, and I'm very humbled that you agreed to come on and talk about your experience.
Thanks for having me.
That's all we got today, freaks. Peace and love. Tiki.